Almost as long as I've been Richard's wife, I've been a doctor. My name is Eleanor. Despite our ups and downs, those 30 years passed by as if they were insignificant. Particularly while the boys were small, the sounds of life permeated our large, comfortable home. Even though our kids, James and Oliver, were completely different from one another, they each made us happy in their own unique ways. As doctors, Richard and I put a lot of effort into creating a comfortable existence. Over the years, we were able to purchase a few flats and rent them out to supplement our income. Up until the day Richard returned home looking paler and more solemn than I had seen him in years, everything seemed to be going well in my life. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he remarked solemnly as he left his medical bag by the door. "Last week, I underwent various testing. The findings, they returned. Eleanor, it's cancer." The months that followed were a haze of unending waiting rooms, treatments, and hospital visits. Despite Richard's valiant efforts, the cancer proved unforgiving. It was agony to watch the strongest man I knew deteriorate. Medical school doesn't prepare you for that. One evening, as we sat quietly in the living room, Richard took my hand. "Eleanor, if things don't go our way, you need to make sure everything's sorted with the boys. The will's all done. You'll be fine financially." Not long after he was gone. The funeral was a somber affair. Family, friends, and colleagues, people came from all over to pay their respects. But it was the quiet at home, after everyone left, that hit me the hardest. Empty spaces. Richard used to fill them. His things just where he left them. It hurt to see, to remember. A few days post-funeral, I was in the kitchen, trying to make sense of leftover food, when James stormed in, his face all twisted up in worry and anger. Oliver trailed behind him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," James said, cutting straight to the chase as he always did. I sighed, setting down the cling film. "Yes, I know. Your father left everything to me. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of." James slammed his hand on the counter. "But what about me and Oliver? We're his sons. It's not right that we get nothing." Now Oliver piped up, trying to smooth things over. "James, let's not jump into this so hot-headed. Mom's still grieving. We can sort this out without arguing." James shot him a glare. "Easy for you to say. You're not thinking about the future. I am." I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of their stares. "Your father and I built this together. He trusted me to handle things, but I hear you, James. It's not my plan to cut you out." "So what then?" James said, crossing his arms, his voice rising a notch. "We just wait until you think it's a good time to give us our share." "James, watch your tone," I snapped, my patience fraying. "I am still your mother." Oliver stepped between us, his hands up like a referee. "Both of you, please. This isn't helping." "Mom, maybe there's a middle ground here." I nodded, rubbing my temples. "Okay, here's what we can do. The apartments your father and I invested in, the ones downtown." James interrupted. "Yes, those." I continued, shooting him a look that told him to zip it for a minute. "I was thinking you each take one. They're yours to live in or rent out. And from the savings, let's say $225,000 each, to help you get started on whatever you need." James chewed on his lip, clearly doing the math in his head. "And the rest of the stuff, the house, the money, that stays with me for now. When I'm gone, it'll come to you." "As for your father's wishes," I said firmly. James looked like he wanted to argue more, but Oliver nudged him. "Let's think about this, man. It's a fair start. Mom's not leaving us in the cold." James finally nodded, tight-lipped. "Fine, but I want this in writing, Mom. No more surprises. Of course, I agreed. We'll get everything documented properly. As they left the kitchen, I could hear Oliver hissing at James. Give her a break, will you? She's doing her best. James muttered something under his breath I couldn't catch, and I didn't really want to. As I washed up the dishes, I wondered if Richard could see us and what he'd think. I hoped I was doing the right thing, but only time would tell. And time, that tricky thing, wasn't always a friend. It was a sunny afternoon, a rare kind that makes everything seem all right, when James brought Isabella over to meet me for the first time. They hadn't been dating long, but James was already head over heels. You could tell by the way he was fussing over her, which wasn't like him at all. They walked in, and right off the bat, Isabella had this air about her, like she owned the place. Dressed to the nines, she breezed into my living room with barely a hello, her eyes scanning everything. "Nice place you've got here," she said, flipping her hair back as she sat down without waiting for an invitation. James was grinning like a fool beside her. I forced a smile, trying to be the good host. "Thank you, Isabella. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee sounds lovely," she replied, then turned to James. "Babe, make sure it's black. No sugar." James nodded and headed to the kitchen. That left me alone with her, sitting in my own living room, feeling like the guest. The silence was awkward until she broke it. "So James tells me you're pretty well off," she started, eyeing the decor. "I'm used to a certain standard, you know. My parents made sure of that." "That's good to hear," I said, not sure what else to add. James came back with the coffee and handed Isabella her cup. She took a sip and made a face. It's all right. Anyway, we've been discussing our future together, planning ahead, you know." "That's wise," I said, glancing at James, hoping he'd give me some clue about where this conversation was heading. Isabella set her cup down. "Yeah, and speaking of planning, we were thinking about the wedding. You know I want something special. James has probably told you. I saw this place, perfect for a rehearsal dinner, but it's a bit pricey. It's about $30,000. I choked on my coffee. $30,000 just for the rehearsal dinner. James jumped in. "Mom, it's important to Bella. We want to start things off right." I put my cup down, feeling a storm brewing inside. "Look, that's a lot of money for a dinner, Isabella. We need to be reasonable." Isabella's face hardened. "Reasonable? James says you have the means. I don't see why we should compromise on something that important." James was nodding along with her, but I could see the unease in his eyes. He knew he was asking too much. "I'm all for celebrating," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But $30,000 is beyond excessive. I can't justify that." Isabella stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not used to compromising on my standards, Eleanor. I was clear with James that I expect a certain lifestyle." James tried to smooth things over. "Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground." "There's no middle ground on $30,000 for a dinner, James." "That's final," I snapped, losing my patience. Isabella picked up her purse, glaring at me. "Fine. If that's how it's going to be, then maybe we need to reconsider some things." They left soon after. I sat there, reeling from the encounter. The nerve of that girl coming into my home, drinking my coffee, and telling me how to spend my money. It felt like a slap in the face, a wake-up call I wasn't ready for. I was out at the grocery store when James and Isabella decided to drop by again. By the time I got home, Oliver was awkwardly entertaining them in the living room. The atmosphere was tense, the kind that makes you want to turn around and leave. But it was my house, so I braced myself and walked in. Isabella, all dolled up as usual, handed me a list as soon as I set down my grocery bags. Eleanor, we thought a lot about the wedding gifts, and here's what we've settled on. I hope this will be easier for you to handle." I skimmed the list she handed me. It was surprisingly sensible. Kitchen appliances, some nice china, even a couple of pieces of furniture. "This seems quite reasonable," I said, feeling a momentary relief. "I think these are wonderful choices, really." James looked at Isabella, a hopeful expression crossing his face. But just as I was about to discuss where we could buy these items, Isabella's expression changed abruptly. She gasped, "Oh no, this isn't right. Give that back." She snatched the list from my hands and rummaged through her purse, pulling out another sheet of paper. "Here's the actual list." This new list was nothing like the first. It included an apartment, a luxury car, an exclusive vacation, and even diamond jewelry. My jaw dropped. Is this some kind of joke? Isabella didn't flinch. "No joke, Eleanor. These are the gifts we expect. Only the best for our wedding." I stared at her, then at James, waiting for him to say something, anything, to suggest he didn't agree with this madness. But he just stood there, looking between us, clearly conflicted but silent. I couldn't hold back. "James, why are you letting her do this? You know this is unreasonable." Isabella cut in, her voice rising. "This doesn't concern you, Eleanor. You just need to pay up and keep quiet." That's when Oliver stood up, his face set hard. "That's enough, Isabella. You're not going to talk to our mom like that. This is her house, and you're way out of line. You need to leave now." The room was thick with tension as James and Isabella gathered their things. Isabella was muttering under her breath, clearly angry. "This is ridiculous. We'll remember this." They left, and the door slammed shut behind them. Sitting down, I felt the weight of the whole situation pressing down on me. Oliver sat beside me, putting an arm around my shoulders. "We'll figure this out, Mom, but you can't let them bully you into giving more than you can or should. It's not right." He was right, of course, but as I sat there with my son, I couldn't help but worry about James. Haven't things gotten so out of hand? How could he not see what this was doing to our family? The silence that followed was filled with unsaid worries and fears for the future. I knew then that this was far from over. It was only going to get tougher from here. The weeks that followed were a constant barrage of phone calls from James. Each one was more demanding than the last. His tone desperate, almost frantic at times. "Mom, you don't understand. I can't look poor next to Bella's family," he'd argue, his voice cracking with stress. "You have the money. Why can't you just help me out here?" I sat at the kitchen table, the phone pressed against my ear, feeling a knot in my stomach. "James, it's not about the money. It's about living within your means. Bella's expectations. You can't sustain that. Not without going into serious debt." He'd scoff, his frustration boiling over. "What do you know about it?" "I'm not going to live like I need more from the inheritance now." "The demand's done, James. I've offered to cover half the wedding costs, up to $115,000, and give a $5,000 gift. That's more than generous. Everything has to be agreed upon with me, though. No surprises." There was a pause, then a sharp laugh from him. "That's nothing. You're just being stingy. You have $1 million sitting there. Why are you holding out on me?" "Because it's not just about the money," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "It's about not feeding into this fantasy that's going to ruin you." He yelled, now loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "I don't need this. I'll handle it my way. Forget you." And then, just like that, the call stopped. Months passed in silence. I tried to busy myself with daily routines, trying not to worry about James. But the peace was short-lived. The phone rang one afternoon. It was my sister-in-law, Anita. "Eleanor, I thought you should know." Anita's voice was hesitant, careful. "James is flying all the wedding guests to Hawaii. He sold his apartment to fund it, and he expects you to get there on your own. He mentioned you weren't interested in helping." I hung up, a mix of anger and sorrow turning inside me. How could he be so reckless? Before I could process it all, Oliver came into the room, his expression grim. "Mom, there's something you need to hear." He handed me an audio recorder. I recorded their conversation when they were sitting here in the living room. I pressed play, and the voices of James and Isabella filled the kitchen. "James, your mom is just a nasty old woman with a fat wallet. We need to squeeze as much as we can out of her, and then cut her off." James's voice responded, chillingly agreeable. "Whatever it takes, Bella. I'm not going to let her control us. If it comes down to it, I'll kick her out in her underwear." I turned off the recorder, my hands trembling. To hear my own son speak like that about me, his mother, was too much. The room spun as I tried to comprehend the depth of his betrayal. Flying to Hawaii was a decision I didn't make lightly. Oliver was by my side, both of us tense, but determined to face whatever awaited us. When we landed and approached the venue, I was taken aback by the sheer opulence of it all. Flowers everywhere, lights strung like stars across the evening sky, and music floating in the air. I saw James and Isabella interacting with guests as we entered the event. With their constant laughter and grins, they appeared to be the ideal couple. Seeing my youngster so engrossed in this made-up paradise broke my heart. Isabella noticed us before I could move closer to them. As she strode closer, her high heels tapping violently against the stone walkway, her smile turned into a frown. She stopped inches from me and snarled, "You shouldn't be here," loud enough to attract attention. "This is my day and you're not welcome." Her parents overheard and approached before I could react, leaving me speechless. The tall, stern-looking man who spoke first was her father. "Isabella, that is no way to speak to your guest, much less to James's mother." His tone was harsh, a reprimand that made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Her mother, looking equally appalled, turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Eleanor, please come with us. Let's find you a place to sit." They led us to a table at the edge of the arrangement, which was obviously an afterthought without the appropriate setting. Shortly later, the ceremony began with speeches that, considering the stress, sounded hollow. The microphone was then handed to me without warning. I stood, my resolve unwavering despite my unsteady legs. I started out by saying, "I came here today to wish my son and his new wife a happy future," maintaining my composure despite my internal shaking. But I also believe in honesty and integrity, something that's been sorely missing from the events leading up to this day. Isabella's face went from pink to red, her eyes glaring daggers at me. I was asked for money time and again in amounts that no reasonable person would find justifiable. When I couldn't meet these demands, I was threatened with separation from my family and future grandchildren. I continued even if my voice cracked a little. Oliver moved closer after noticing my anguish and put a comforting hand on my shoulder. After giving him a nod, I switched on the audio recording he had created. Isabella's icy, cunning voice filled the room as she talked about how they would take advantage of me for more money. James's voice concurred, stating that he was willing to give up everything for his bride. The air was heavy with astonishment and disdain as the crowd whispered. The silence was profound as I switched off the recorder. I gave my son an apartment and $25,000, and yet it was never enough. Today I'm making it clear, I will not be treated as an ATM or threatened. I am done with James and Isabella. I wish them well, but from this day forward, I am choosing to remove myself from their lives." The reaction was immediate. Isabella screamed, her voice shrill and wild. "You've ruined my wedding. I curse you." Returning home was bittersweet after everything that had transpired. Even I was surprised by the decision I made in the silence. I resigned from my position. As a doctor, I had spent years mending people, but now it was time to heal myself and put my life back together after the recent storms had destroyed it. Bless his heart, Oliver was full of ideas and aspirations after graduating from art college. I gave him $25,000. He used that money to start his own tattoo studio. It was no ordinary store. It soon developed into a location where skin and art came together in breathtaking presentations. Oliver gave his everything to his effort, and it was fruitful. He started entering tattoo contests, and soon enough his name was on every local's lips. Before we knew it, he was opening more locations, creating a network of salons that became a hot spot for tattoo enthusiasts. I'd watch him sketch late into the night, his dedication a stark contrast to the chaos his brother had chosen. "You're doing amazing, Ollie," I'd say, pride swelling in my chest. It was during these calm months that James reappeared. One afternoon, he showed up at the door, his eyes tired, his shoulders slumped, so different from the ambitious, sharp man he once was. He stated, "Mom, I need to talk," without waiting for a meeting invitation. In contrast to the authoritative tone I had become used to, his voice seemed tired. I let out a sigh and gestured for him to go on. "What is it, James?" "Saying it's Bella. She's making me crazy. It seems like nothing is ever enough. Even with my second job, she still doesn't think it's enough." Despite his desperation, his words were unable to completely change the past. "I warned you, James. I told you that it's not sustainable to live that way with someone like her." With obvious annoyance, he rubbed his face. I know you did, but I thought," he said, his voice trailing off, explanation replaced by despair. "What did you think? Wouldn't you want the money to just show up?" Years of repressed annoyance made it difficult to soften my harsh tone. "Take a look at your brother. He began with the same determination and succeeded without infringing on the rights of others." James became agitated. "Indeed, it's true that not everyone is like Oliver. Remember that I also have rights to the inheritance, and I'll get it when you're gone." The final straw was that. I said, "Get out, James," in a firm, icy tone. "And don't return. Not now. You made your own decisions." His jaw tensed, and I briefly believed he might continue to dispute. However, the door slammed behind him as he turned and left. After hearing the final portion of our conversation, Oliver came downstairs while I was standing in the ensuing silence. He said, "Are you okay, Mom?" I nodded and wrapped my arms around him. "Thank you, I am now. Let's just concentrate on the good we can accomplish and the life we can create." He gave me a hug in return, reassuring me that not all had been lost. I realized then that the path was still worthwhile in spite of the hardships. The fact that we had each other was sufficient to keep going. Our house calmed down after James and I weathered the storm, which I hadn't experienced in a long time. Oliver welcomed a special someone home during this calm time. Her name was Sarah, and she was lovely, modest, and truly caring, everything Isabella wasn't. Their bond deepened as the weeks stretched into months, and they soon declared their engagement. In contrast to James's lavish celebration, the wedding was a small, intimate ceremony held in our backyard. The day was made ideal by a small gathering of close friends and family, handcrafted decorations, and flowers from the garden. During the reception, I pulled Oliver aside. "You've chosen a wonderful woman," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He squeezed my hand. "I learned from the best," he said, glaring at me sardonically. After then, life happened fast. They used some of their funds to purchase a modest but comfortable home a few miles away after selling the flat I had given Oliver. Sarah gave us some news one bright afternoon while we were enjoying tea in their beautiful living room. She declared, "Eleanor, we're expecting twins," with delight in her eyes. I nearly dropped my cup, overwhelmed with joy. Twins? Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. Oliver smiled, clearly proud. "We wanted to let you know first. Mom, we're very happy." Twins. I said it again, giving the words time to register. Grandchildren. I was excited to begin this new chapter. There wasn't much news from James. He had divorced Isabella as of the last time I heard. He had to start again in another city because she had taken almost everything after the separation. It was painful to know that he was struggling someplace as a result of his decisions, even in spite of the suffering he had inflicted. Oliver sat next to me one evening as I was browsing through old photo albums. He came across an old photo of James and me. He said, "Do you ever hear from him?" I gave a head shake. No. After all, I have to respect his decision to follow his own path, even though it hurts my feelings. Oliver wrapped me in his arm. "Mom, he remains my brother. Perhaps he will eventually change his mind." I said, "Maybe," though I wasn't entirely sure if I believed it. We have plenty to occupy us for the time being, though, particularly with those twins on the way. Oliver laughed. "Yeah, you're about to be the busiest grandma in town." The sound of our laughter filled the room with warmth. This moment with Oliver felt like everything was just right, despite the history, the mistakes, and the heartaches. We were both going on with life, with new aspirations and expectations on the horizon.